I always say to my students, it's not necessarily how much information. It's not how much information that you have culled from different sources. It's how well do you know the information that you've actually taken from a source. So, you could transcribe 100 solos, and if you never go back to them and never practice them, what good has that done you?
Right, exactly.
But you could transcribe one solo, and if you get every bit of juice out of that solo, I mean every bit of juice, and you get so deep into it that someone could wake you up in the middle of the night and you could play that solo at 3 a.m., then you've learned something,
Yeah, I have been very fortunate to have a friendship with Gary Foster over the years.
Yeah.
And I remember when I brought him into Tennessee, we had those early Stan Getz recordings. I think they're the Savoy recordings where he's doing Hershey Bar.
Yeah, I love those.
And we're sitting there. Here's a man that's, probably 30, 35 years my senior. He was the best friend of one of my teachers.
Sure.
And we're sitting in this bar in the middle of eastern Tennessee singing Stan Getz's solos. And it was like, I realized, there's no age limit that you're a fan.
Yeah.
I understand that what was the term that was used, that you're kind of a vinyl fanatic. Are you still?
Yeah, I mean less so now than I used to be, because now no one listens. I suppose people do still listen to vinyl, but I wouldn't say I'm the biggest fanatic. I still have my records at home, and I'll still put them on.
There's just something different about listening to that music on vinyl for me. Is it because that's the era we grew up in? Or?
I think it's and I also think it's just the ritual of doing it that I kind of like. There's something ritualistic about it, and there's something very physical about dropping the needle and hearing the little pop and little crackle of when a record starts. And the other part about that I like about just record albums is that you're only getting that amount of music. You're listening to one side and you can digest that side. It's not like you have like Apple Music where you have a million different tracks that you could listen to if you wanted to, and it's all there at your fingertips. When you commit to listening to a side of music on a record, first of all, you drop the needle and then you just let it go.
Right.
And you're not.
There's no fast forward.
Right. There's no scan. Oh, I've heard enough of that scan. So it's really, you're making a commitment for that period of time, for that 15 or 20 minutes, to listen to that music for 15 or 20 minutes. It was really nice. I did a radio show while I was in Albuquerque. I was doing a interview, and part of the radio show, which I thought was really a great idea, is every artist that comes in picks one side of an LP, and it's their choice to play, and they put it on and they played it in its entirety without interruption, and then you talk about it afterwards, which I think is a fantastic idea.
Oh, yeah.
And so I picked side one of Eastern Rebellion 2 with Bob Berg, the Cedar Walton record.
Yeah.
And it had been a while since I had put that record on, and we dropped the needle on it, and I listened to it, and we were just quietly listening. And it just blew me away that day, because it was the right context, and I was really listening deeply, and I thought, man, it's so great to hear Bob Berg again on record. It's a record that I know backwards and forwards, but I hadn't heard it in probably a few years. Mm-hmm. So there is something about that. There is something about listening to a record album and just sitting quietly and just getting into your Zen zone, and really letting it penetrate you in that way is really a special thing.
Do you find it a challenge with younger students now that they're coming and listening from kind of, well, I guess we were of the Walkman generation.
Right.
But they are, I was floored the other day when I was talking to a student. I just asked him how he listened to music. And he had never listened to music for the purpose of just listening.
Yeah. It's
always in transit to somewhere else.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's tough. I mean, and I feel like I'm guilty of that too now. Of course I'm on the go a lot, so it's my music listening sometimes tends to be on the subway or on the plane. Yeah, it's still, when I can get a quiet moment, I treasure those quiet moments when I do have a moment to myself, even if it is in the window seat of a plane, and I'll have my headphones on and I'll put something on and I'll really be in the moment with that piece of music for that period of time. And I've really tried to consciously, because sometimes it is a conscious effort. I think that, cell phones have changed our natures in a certain way to be very impatient. And so I've tried to lately really make myself, if I start listening to a record, I say, I'm not going to, look for something else to listen to right away. I'm really going to allow at least this track to play from beginning to end without searching for like, oh, I don't want to hear that. Oh, I don't want to hear that. I don't want to hear that. So I think it's good to get in the practice of just listening patiently, and it's something that does take practice, and it's something that takes students practice too, because they're really not used to listening that way. Exactly. So yeah, I would say it's changed not just young musicians, but I'd say it's changed all of us. I mean, it's changed the way we relate to everything. The patience with which we watch a movie, or the patience with which we read a novel, or any of those things. It's definitely been detrimental to that, I would say.
Do you find that the students that you work with are listening to music that, you talk about discovering Charlie Parker, and I remember being a freshman in college and all of us trying to learn a Charlie Parker hit, and we all had the Omnibook and the complete recordings, and trying to go, oh my God, how did he do this?
Sure.
But it seems like Charlie Parker is not standard listening for a generation of players. I mean, to them, John Coltrane is jazz.
Right.
Is that a challenge with working with younger students to get the history, or?
Yeah, I would say it's a challenge. I mean, and some of them don't want to do it, and they're more into listening to Chris Potter or Snarky Puppy or whatever is that they're listening to, and that's okay with me. I mean, I'm okay with it as long as they're excited about something. I'm pretty happy these days, as long as they're not apathetic.
Right.
And my guidance as far as that goes with those students is to say, you might want to think about, if you like those guys, you might want to think about where they came from, like what informed them. That Chris Potter didn't just sprout up out of the ground, out of nowhere. Right. That he came from Charlie Parker, really, in a big way, and he really understands that music in a very intimate way. And sometimes when they hear that, for some of them you'll see a light go on. For some of them you won't. But that's all I can do is try and just lead them to water as much as I possibly can, and preach the gospel that I learned as a kid, which is listening to all of those older players that are infused with the blues and swing and the thing, and talking about the elements of jazz that made me fall in love with it in the first place. I feel like that's my job as an educator, to just be excited in front of them and to demonstrate in front of them how I've gotten to where I've gotten to. So, and that's really all I can do. As far as the other stuff, whether they will take up the reins and become interested in the history of music, I don't know. I just sometimes life has to sort that out. So
yeah, I always I was with a student yesterday who's an older gentleman who plays trumpet, and he's going to do, for his 70th birthday, he's going to do a concert of just Clifford Brown's music.
Yeah,
that's his favorite. And I was listening to some of his recordings from the 50s and thinking to myself, this is as relevant, if ever.
Yeah.
And then I think about a lot of the younger players today who are influenced by Lee Konitz and Warren Marsh, and thinking about, this is stuff that happened in 1949,
sure,
1951.
Sure.
And it is still light years ahead of I guess what I call the math jazz.
Right, right. Right. Well, it was a different feeling too. I mean, I think the fact that that it was a little bit more, maybe it was closer to being a music of its time than what it is now, and maybe we're just kind of in a growing. I think maybe you could look at it as we're in a period of growing pains for jazz music in a way. If whatever that means anyway, whatever the term jazz means anymore. Right. It's hard to say, where it's going to go. I will say that I'm actually encouraged by the fact that I hear younger musicians writing some of them are writing some really incredible music. I mean, some of them are not just writing what I would call math jazz, but writing some really inspired music. I heard a track off of Joel Ross's new record on the radio. Joel Ross, the vibraphonist. He's signed to Blue Note.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah.
I was in a taxi the other night, and they were playing it on WBGO, and one of the track from Joel Ross came up, and it was marvelous. I mean, it was just, I think any of those vibraphonists from back in the day would have been very proud of him. I think if Bobby Hutcherson were alive, or any of his mentors would say, man, this kid is on fire. And so I think there are those players out there that are really taking it seriously, and even if they're not connected to the roots in the same way that maybe we're connected to the roots, they're finding their way, and all I can do, is just sort of spread the message of what I like, and just say, I still love Lester Young, I still love Charlie Parker, I still love Miles Davis, I love all those people, and just preach that gospel and hope that it rubs off on young people, and that's really all I can do.
Well, I know that technically your work has garnered a lot of attention from younger players, but what I've always been struck by are two things in your playing, and I wanted to ask you to talk about them. One is your sound. Mm-hmm. That your sound has got, you sound like Joel Frahm, but I hear these layers of influence and
sure.
character to the sound. Just the core to your sound is something that has always struck me. And the other one is what you do with a melody, a melodic line that I don't hear that much.
Right.
And just the importance of a melody, even at a fast tempo.
Sure.
There's direction and shape.
Sure. Yeah, some of those things. Well, I have to give credit where credit's due. I had a complex relationship in college with. There's my college saxophone teacher was John Purcell, and we, without getting too deep into it, we had a kind of a complex relationship. It wasn't all good, but it wasn't all bad either. But the one thing that I really took away from him is I did a ton of sound studies with him. I worked on breathing, and I worked on embouchure, and I worked on just the feeling of producing a tone, and it was very obsessive work for me at the time. Maybe too obsessive. In fact, I got to a point where I was so obsessed with my tone that I actually had to kind of take a step back at a certain point. But I did spend a number of years really very in a very in-depth way working on my sound, and at this point I don't really regret that, because I think it really did help me to create this very present and sort of strong, simple sound that I have at the core of my playing. Mm-hmm. So that was a valuable period of time for me in that way, was to really develop away from everything else, just develop the sound of the saxophone, the sound of my tone all over the horn. So I really did spend a lot of time doing that. And then, I think that as far as the melody goes, I've always gravitated towards players like, I love singers, first of all. I love vocalists.
You've worked with a real who's who.
Yeah. I've been lucky in that way, and I've always, whenever I want to get a dose of real emotion from the music, I put on a vocalist. I'll put on Billie Holiday, or I'll put on, Carmen McRae, or Andy Bay. There's so many different vocalists who I really, really love. Nancy Wilson, where if I put something on by them, it'll just go straight into my heart, and it'll unwind all of that, whatever else is going on for the day, and it sort of puts me in tune with what's important to me in the music, with the expression that's important.
Do you think instrumentalists have a tendency to look down upon singers, as they're not a source of...
Yeah.
I know what Miles always used to say about Sinatra and phrasing.
Yeah.
And for me, having the honor of getting to play with Kurt Elling,
right,
just being behind him and listening to what he does and
right,
doesn't do with his voice.
Right.
And go, how do I do that on my instrument?
Oh, sure. No, he's incredible too. Yeah. I remember I played a few gigs with him too, where he's really a powerhouse. And he can really get to a certain emotion too. He's got an emotional heft to his singing that is special. There are times. In fact, there's a track that I will often, two tracks actually, that I really, really love, that are very special to me on the Live at the Green Mill record. One is it called Esperanto, the Vince Mendoza track?
Yeah.
And he sings it, and first of all, it's very poetic. The words that he put to that song are very poetic. It's very, very emotional. And then he also did Smoke Gets in Your Eyes, and he puts words to. I think it's based on the Keith Jarrett version, because there's a Keith Jarrett version that he took the outro to the coda to, and he wrote this whole, sort of rhapsodic thing over the Keith Jarrett addendum to the song, and it just kills me every time. I mean, I can put it on and just tears will start running down my face. So yeah, those kind of things. I've tried to implement that into my playing as much as possible, and I try and remember even before I go up into a performance, not to just get caught up in the technical, and not to just get caught up in being a jazz robot, because given the fact that I have a lot of chops on the horn, it can be a real pitfall for me, and has been a pitfall. I mean, even now, there are times where I'll go into a gig and it'll just be like, and I'm not trying to mail it in, but there are times where, just because either I'm tired or whatever reason, I'm falling back upon just all the physical memory that's there, and it's not, and I know that it's not really inspired. So to guard against that, I've always tried to immerse myself in listening to music that holds that key, that turns whatever that is in my heart, and allows that stuff to soften and come out. And there are certain pieces of music that do it for me. Bernadette Peters does it for me for whatever reason. I listen.
No, I get it.
I listen to her sing "Not a Day Goes By," and it's just like, it just unlocks everything.
Yeah.
Donny Hathaway does it for me.
My father was 58 years older than me, so when I was in the house, I had Julia London records.
Yeah.
He would always play something cool.
Yeah.
And even now, just hearing that, you're just kind of like, how do I do it?
Yeah. I'm wondering. Actually, that's some of the question I'd like to ask you, because I'm curious. Like, as far as, because it's something that I've been struggling with recently. Actually, I just did this trio recording, and wrote about eight new songs for it, and I'm relatively happy with it. I listen to the tracks, but there are times when I'm listening to it and I can tell that I'm in leader mode, and I can tell that there are times when I'm playing my solo that it's sort of like, okay, this is what a good jazz soloist would do at this time, instead of really getting to the deeper level of what do I actually have to say on that day. And so I'm always curious as to how different musicians get to that spot before they perform, where they can allow whatever's naturally inside them to just come out without it just being like a total technical exercise through the performance.
That's the trick.
Yeah, it's hard.
My son is a tennis player, and a really good junior tennis player, and he's asking about, how do I win this and how do I do that? And I said, I think that playing tennis or anything physical has got to be like playing music. You go to your lessons, you have to practice, and then at some point in time you have to let your inner whatever come out.
Right.
I've always been captivated, for me as a player, and Gary Foster swears that this is what you should be doing, but that those moments where I'm completely out of my element. I mean, I remember in college we were opening up for Dave Brubeck.
Yeah.
And Joe Lovano was the next night.
Yeah.
And we were opening up and we were playing a Keith Jarrett tune that I didn't have the ability to play.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, God, I hope the stage opens up and
swallows me up.
Because I'm just horrible. And then I get off and all these guys, I look there's my jazz band director, Dan Gailey, and there's Lovano, and they're freaking out. They're like, you sounded great.
Yeah.
I'm like, why is it whenever I feel the worst, people seem to think it sounds the best?
Yeah.
And then Gary says that he thinks that's actually where you're vulnerable and everything comes out.
Yeah.
I mean, listening to that trio recording, I don't know, but I hear that leader mode. I hear. In fact, I was really amazed by the interplay of the members in that group, because trio playing is gotta be. I mean, do you find it to be difficult?
It depends, I think it depends on the day. I mean, some days are better than others, and it just depends on my comfort level, and a lot of times I think we've all had the experience where sometimes you'll go to a gig and you're not expecting anything on that gig, and that's where you'll play the absolute best because you weren't expecting anything from it. I think whenever we have high expectations, or we start putting more and more expectations on ourselves to play well, to gain some impossible level of musical achievement on whatever gig it's going to be, that's sort of the beginning of the end. That tends to be like a little bit of a death knell for the performance, because you're already chopping your knees out before you've even started playing. There's no way you can reach these unreasonable expectations that you've set for yourself. So, to me, I think the thing is to just try and go into every situation sort of fresh, and just take a deep breath and just say, okay, this is what's in front of me, and I just have to deal with what's in front of me.
At what point in your life did you see if I could say this that makes sense? It's like a friend of mine who says, there was one day when I looked in the mirror and I was okay with who I saw.
Yeah.
At what point in time in your career did you listen to recordings of yourself or your playing and go, okay, that's who I am? Because I remember for the longest time going, oh God, I want to sound like this. I don't want to sound like me.
Right.
And then you realize, well, isn't that kind of who you're supposed to be?
Yeah, I don't know if that ever really goes away. I know it hasn't gone away for me. I mean, there are times where I've listened to recordings back of myself. It doesn't happen often, but there are times where I'll listen to something, and sometimes it takes someone else pulling my coat to it. Sometimes my dad will get a record. I never listen to my recordings, first of all. If I make a record, and my dad will often come to visit me in New York City, and I'll say, I've got 3 or 4 new ones, here you go, take them home. And I haven't listened to them at all. And I let him listen to them. And if he comes up to me and says, you should really hear this thing that you did here, then I'll listen to that.
Gary Foster's like that. He says he never listens to recordings he did.
Yeah.
And I said, why? And he goes, I've already done it.
Right.
He says, I'm trying to figure out the next thing.
Yeah. I mean, and it's not that I don't enjoy it. I mean, obviously there's a sense of pride if I hear something that I've done well. And there are recordings that I've done where I felt, oh wow, that was really good, and I've listened to them several times, and I'll feel good about it. But I don't know if there was really one point in time where I started feeling confident about anything. I mean, it's more just.
Maybe that is a dangerous time when you're like, oh, it sounds good.
Yeah, no, I don't. Well, first of all, I don't think it would ever happen for me. I mean, I don't. I mean, if I, if I start saying that, you should probably call the doctor. There's probably something wrong.
But there, I won't mention any names, but I'm thinking of one in particular. There's one tenor player that every time I hear him play, I go, God, I wish I could do what you do.
Yeah.
And he just absolutely hates him.
Right.
And I think, oh.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah. There's not a lot. There's not a lot of objectivity in our business. I mean, I think that's a fairly common trait among us. That musicians are sensitive souls, and we're always very self-critical, especially those musicians who care about getting better and care about improving. We're often our own worst critics. Almost always we're our own worst critics, even if we don't show it to the outside world. And so, I don't know that there will ever be a point where I really feel, quote unquote, satisfied with what I've done. But I'm hoping to feel, as I move along, at least more peaceful with what I'm doing. I mean, that's sort of my goal at this point, just to have a sense of peace about my journey and my path, and that I'm making the right decisions and all of that kind of stuff. So,
what would you tell yourself, that kid that's going to New York, knowing what you've experienced and gone through now? Is there any advice that you would give that 18-year-old?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, if I could have talked to myself back in the day, I would have said avoid drugs and alcohol. That's one thing that as much as you possibly can, to avoid those things. Not that I was ever the worst about that, but I had my problems, and that was definitely a pitfall for me. I would say if you're feeling down and you're feeling depressed, to ask for help. I would say to also, as much as possible, go and seek out those older musicians that you really admire and be around them as much as you possibly can without annoying them. Mm-hmm. Go out and see as much music by your heroes as you possibly can, get inspired by it. And then, I think the last thing that I would say to any young musician is just realize that it's not only about how well you play, it's also about, can you show up on time, can you look good, can you deal with other people, do you have all of the adult human qualities that you need to have in order to be a viable working musician in the community. And if you can answer yes to all those questions, then you're probably doing okay. But yeah, we all wish that I certainly wish that I could go back 20 and 30 years and just advise myself to avoid this and avoid that. But there are certainly things that I would have done differently, for sure.
How has being a musician in New York over the last 30 years changed? I mean, the city has changed so much.
Yeah, I mean, it has changed. I mean, the city changed. I mean, I would say 9/11 was a big demarcation, I would say, because the city, the feeling of the city changed to me after that. And maybe I might be romanticizing it a little bit, but it just, up until 9/11, I remember the city feeling more carefree and feeling less corporate and feeling. It just felt like there was more of a free chance for young artists to do what they were going to do and not worry about where tomorrow's paycheck was coming from, and also the rents weren't insane at that point either. So it all seemed a little more possible back then. I think it's become a little bit more It's become more exorbitant to live there, and for artists, I think it's become especially difficult for young musicians to go there and make their way. I don't know. I've been lucky because I've kept my overhead low all these years, and I sort of, continue to live an affordable lifestyle. Yeah, New York feels different than it used to. Oh, but I will say this. I mean, the reason that I've stuck it out all of these years is I'm always reminded. Like about a month ago, I remember feeling kind of frustrated about what I was doing in New York City and feeling like, man, it's like sometimes it's such a grind. And then Ari Honey called me to play trio at Smalls, with him and Orlando LaFleming, and I went out and I had an absolute blast. And after that evening, I came home and I thought, where else am I going to do this? There's nowhere else on the planet that I'm going to have the experience that I just had, And so that's the reason that I keep coming back is that, or that I keep staying there, is that I know that I'm going to have those musical experiences that where I'm swimming and the water is a little bit over my head, and I'm with musicians that are really going to kick me in the butt. And there's really no replacing that. I don't think there's any replacement for that experience.
And I imagine New York has always just been a different place for the experience of jazz than Chicago or Los Angeles.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's a different feeling. I mean, every city has its own charms, and as I've traveled around. It's not to say that there aren't great musicians in every town, because there certainly are great musicians in every town. But there is something about the energy of going to a New York, jazz hang and seeing all the guys play. I went the other night. It was so sad. Lawrence Leathers died, and that was so hard for all of us. And so we were all out, sort of thinking about Lawrence the other night at Smalls. It was the day of or the day after it happened, and. I had a trio gig at Mesro, and then I wasn't ready to go home, and I went over to Smalls, and I went up, and there were some young musicians, and Grant Stewart was playing tenor with these musicians, and they sounded just tremendous, and Grant sounded out of this world. And then Johnny O'Neill, the great singer and piano player, got up and sang something for Lawrence, and it was incredibly emotional. And after that night, I went home and I thought, man, here is the epicenter of all of this emotion and all of this incredible music going on in this one spot, and it would be hard for me to give that up, So that is really why I stay. That's the one reason that really keeps me there.
What do you think we can do to try to bring the average person into the experience that you're talking about? Because I know you in New York, you have a group of people that they're diehard jazz fans,
sure,
and they're always going to go seek out, no matter what.
Sure.
But I keep going back to the idea that the average person, my son says, well, I don't like orchestras.
Right.
So I took him to the Omaha Symphony, and the first thing he did was, holy cow, I didn't know it sounded like that.
Yeah.
It's different when the sound waves are hitting you.
Right, that's right.
What do you think we could be doing to bring in the average person to understand?
Well, I think it takes, I think it takes advertisement, first of all. I mean, I think it takes getting the word out, I know that whenever I go to do a concert in a new spot, if I'm going to a new city, it always does like 50 to 75% better if there's been like a story in the paper, or if I've been on the radio, or if there's a TV spot before I play. I mean, I think that's step one is just, making people aware however it's possible, social media, whatever it is, letting the people that maybe aren't into jazz know that, hey, you know what, I'm playing somewhere, whether you like jazz or not, this is something that you might want to come out and see, and just making it look attractive, like it's going to be a good time. I think that's part of it. I think also musicians maybe not taking themselves so seriously would help, like to actually to present something without just being dour the entire time. Not everyone's guilty of that, but I've seen enough of that too, where sometimes there's been no thought given to the fact that you are actually performing for an audience, and it's like Pat Metheny said something in an interview. He said, the last thing that I want to do is to go to someone's gig and watch them play a tune and then sit there for 2.5 minutes while the band discusses, well, what are we going to play next? He says, man, write a set list, like stuff like that. And he's right. I mean, it's like a lot of those issues could be solved in a way by just musicians taking the reins and saying, you know what, I'm going to up my product a little bit and make sure that this is something that people really want to hear, or even if they may not like it, it's going to be something that's polished and something that's ready to go for the public at the time. So I think there's a lot that we can do just on our own as a matter of responsibility to increase our chances, at least, But that's why I think it's really important as well. When I was talking about jazz societies earlier in our conversation, it's important for people to support those things. If they have something in their community where someone's, if there's an individual that's really trying to keep it alive on that grassroots way, for people to come and do what they can to keep it alive. I think those types of groups and programs are so important to the lifeblood of what all of us as jazz musicians are doing. We wouldn't survive without it. So. That's all I would say, is just to try and get the community involved as much as possible.